الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. أما بعد, respected viewers, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to the fifth lesson of the explanation of the book of Zakat. In today's lesson, we will cover the topic of Zakat al-Urud al-Tijariya, or Zakat on goods and merchandise. First thing, we are going to list the conditions that necessitate paying zakat on merchandise. The first condition is the attainment of an-nisab, meaning the merchandise attains an-nisab, the minimum amount of money that makes zakat obligatory. And an-nisab of merchandise is based on the value of gold or the value of silver. And therefore the owner has the choice to base the zakat either on the value of gold or the value of silver. But as we mentioned in the previous lesson, it is better to calculate a nisab based on the value of silver. The second condition is the lapse of al-hawl. The lapse of al-hawl meaning 1 Hijri year has to pass. And therefore the owner of the merchandise has to evaluate his merchandise at the end of the Hijri year. And if the merchandise reaches the nisab, then he has to pay zakat on it. The third condition is the complete ownership of the merchandise, meaning the owner of this merchandise has access to it and can sell it and has control over it, because sometimes the person owns something but he has no control over it, whether he lost it or whether it's in the hands of someone else. So complete ownership of the merchandise is a condition in Zakat al-Urud al-Tijariya, the zakat on goods and merchandise. The last condition is an-niyya, which is the intention to use it for trade. The intention to use the goods and merchandise for the sake of profit by buying and selling it. For the zakat on goods and merchandise is only obligatory on the goods and merchandise that are taken for trade. Let's move now to the next slide to talk about very important rules regarding the zakat on goods and merchandise. The first rule is that there is no zakat on objects intended for personal use. So the person's personal cars, furnitures, homes, etc., all of these things are not subject to zakat because they're not intended for business. They are intended for personal use, and therefore there is no zakat on them. There is no zakat on goods and merchandise intended for rent. Things such as real estate, cars, clothes, and other things. These are not subject to zakat, as zakat is due on the rent if it reaches a nisab and al-hawl has passed. For instance, if Zayd bought a house and then he rents it, at the end of 1 Hijri year, Zayd does not pay zakat based on the value of the house, but he pays zakat based on the money that he collects from the rent. So if the saved money reaches a nisab and al-hawl has passed, then Zayd has to pay zakat on that money. There is no zakat on machinery, fixtures, fittings, buildings, and cars used for businesses. But the zakat is obligatory on the goods that are manufactured in manufactories. Zakat is also obligatory on goods that are in the process of being prepared or are in the form of raw material, because at the end these goods will become a finished merchandise. In the next slide we will take a look at some examples of goods and merchandise purchased with the intention of resale. If a Muslim buys a piece of land or a car or a home or a property with the intention of reselling it, then a zakat will be obligatory on its current market value. And the following example shows us how to calculate the zakat on this kind of wealth. Here we have Zayd, who bought a land for $100,000, and after 1 Hijri year the land selling price is $120,000. When Zaid bought the land, he had the intention to resell it. So he was waiting on it, and whenever the price goes up, he would resell it. Alright, so after 1 Hijri year, the price of the land went up to $120,000. To calculate the zakat on this land, we take the $120,000, we multiply it by 2.5%, which will give us $3,000. Or we take the $120,000, we divide it by 40, and it will give us $3,000. And that's the amount that Zaid has to pay on his land. Okay, let's take another example. Here we have Amr, who bought a land for $100,000, and after 1 Hijri year, the land selling price is $70,000. So in this situation, does Amr pay zakat based on the buying price, which is $100,000, or based on the current market value, which is $70,000? The answer, Amr pays the zakat based on the current market value, which is $70,000. Islam is just and fair. Islam does not look at the profit or the loss of the person, but it looks at how much the person owns, and he pays the zakat based on that. So the way to calculate Amr's zakat, we do the following. We take the $70,000, we multiply it by 2.5%, which will give us $1,750. Or we can take the $70,000, we divide it by 40, and it will give us the same amount, $1,750, and that's the amount that Amr has to pay as zakat. In the next slide, we will learn how to pay zakat on merchandise. So for retail business, we look at the value of the inventory at the end of the Hijri year. We look at the inventory and not at each product separately, because we cannot go to each product and try to find out if 1 Hijri year has passed or not. That's not the way to calculate a zakat for retail stores. The way to calculate a zakat for retail stores is to evaluate the inventory at the end of the Hijri year, at the end of Al-Hawl. And let's assume that a person started his retail business on Ramadan of year 1435 Hijri. So in Ramadan of 1436 Hijri, he looks at the inventory, evaluates his inventory, then calculates the zakat as follow. Let's assume that the inventory is $200,000. The way to calculate the zakat, we take the $200,000 multiplied by 2.5%, which will give us $5,000. Or we take the $200,000 divided by 40, and it will give us $5,000. That's the amount that this person has to pay as zakat. It is very important to know that we calculate the zakat based on the selling price of the merchandise, not on the buying price of the merchandise. So we calculate a zakat based on how much the products are worth on the day of a zakat. When it comes to the wholesale business, it is the same concept. We evaluate the merchandise and pay zakat based on the selling price of the products and not on the buying price of the products. Sheikh Al-Uthaymin rahimahullah said, if the businessman is one who sells wholesale, then he should base his zakat on the wholesale price. And if he is one who sells retail, then he should base his zakat on the retail price. Let's take an example. We have a wholesale inventory that's worth $300,000. The way to calculate the zakat is as follows. We take the $300,000 multiplied by 2.5%, which will give us $7,500. Or we take the $300,000, we divide it by 40, and it will give us $7,500, and that's the amount that this person has to pay as zakat. Now let's go to the next slide and learn how to calculate zakat for manufacturers and calculate zakat for salaries. In this example, we have Bakr, and Bakr owns a cell phone manufactory, and at the end of the Hijri year he wanted to pay Zakat. How does he calculate his Zakat? Bakr calculated the inventory, the finished product, and found that the finished product are worth $250,000. Then he looked at the raw material he has in the manufactory, such as the glasses, the wires, all the raw materials that he uses to make cell phones, and he found that he has $35,000 worth of raw materials. So he added that to the $250,000, and it gave him the total of $285,000. Now, to calculate the zakat on these 285,000, we do the following. We take the 285,000, we multiply it by 2.5%, which will give us 7,125, or we take the 285,000 and we divide it by 40, and it will give us the same amount, $7,125. That's the amount that Bakr has to pay as zakat for his cell phone manufacturing. The next example is the example of salary. In our example, we have Khalid, and Khalid is an employee who gets a paycheck every 2 weeks. So as an employee, his account is not stable. Sometimes he has savings, sometimes he does not have any savings, and sometimes he borrows money to pay his bills. But at the end of the Hijri year, he looked at his account and found that he has $3,000. So how he pays his zakat? Khalid takes the $3,000, multiply it by 2.5%, which will give him $75, or he can take the $3,000 and divide it by 40, and it will give him $75. That's the amount that Khalid should pay as zakat for his salary. So when it comes to salaries, because the salaries are not stable, they go up and down, so the Muslim should make a day to pay zakat. For instance, he makes it the first of Ramadan or the middle of Ramadan or any other Hijri month, Rabi' al-Awwal, Rabi' al-Thani, and he says on every Rabi' al-Awwal I will look at my account and see how much money I have, and I pay zakat based on the money I have on my savings. And this is the way that the Muslim should pay zakat on his salary. Let's move on now to the next slide and talk about the zakat when the person is in debt or when he lends money to others, and how he pays zakat on that money. Let's first talk about the zakat on loaned money. If the debt owed to the creditor is on people who have money and are able to pay whenever the creditor asks them for the money, then in this case the creditor must pay zakat on that money. So every time a Hijri year passes on it, the creditor must pay zakat on that money. Now, if the debt is on people who are facing hardship, facing financial difficulty, or is on people who have the money but are not willing to pay, they are not willing to pay the debt, in this case the creditor does not have to pay zakat, and whenever he gets the money back and keeps it for one Hijri year, then he pays his zakat. The second example is zakat on debt. This is when a person is on debt. So the first two examples were when the person loans money, lends money to others, but now he borrows money from others. So shall he pay zakat? The person who is in debt must pay zakat on the wealth that is in his possession, because the ayat from the Quran al-Karim and the hadith of Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam, when it comes to the zakat, they do not make any exception. There is no exception made for a person who is in debt, and therefore the person who is in debt, if he has money and the money has reached the nisab and passed 1 Hijri year, then he has to pay zakat on that money he has in his hands. And with this, we come to the end of this lesson. I ask Allah Azza wa Jalla to make us among those who listen to the word and follow the best of it. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين.